I have been fascinated by and obsessed with Candy Cadet's stories since his original appearance in Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator, aka FNAF 6. These stories haven't left my mind since, and with the addition of 3 new stories from Ruin and Help Wanted 2, we now have 6 Candy Cadet stories to enjoy. The final story isn't really presented the same as the others, since it is intentionally presented at a different angle, so I'm actually going to set it aside and touch on it separately with the knowledge of everything else we'll cover before it. So I guess, in a way, I'm taking 5 stories and turning them into one category. I'm on theme already. Each of these stories acts as both a vignette circling a theme, as well as a folktale-style moral meant to leave the receiver with some kind of lesson. All of them are marked by their presence in a horror story, and so the punishment is far greater than that which we might expect from a traditional folktale. The first 3 all surround the idea of 5 things becoming one thing, and the dangers therein. The next 2 focus on the dangers of naivety, false comfort, and trust. The final is kind of native advertising for Fazbear, but we'll get there. The first 3 have the setup of the threat of harm to innocent beings. The first 2 of these have the dangers of not making a choice, or action by inaction, and the third has the danger of making a choice whose potential for good equally increases the potential for bad. The next 2 have plots driven by retribution, revenge, naivety, and the theme of something akin to the dangers of trusting others. The first is a cautionary tale of overconfidence convincing you to let your guard down, and the second is a story about getting what you give, so to speak. The last one, we will get to it. All of these stories contain some kind of moral, one which Scott explores across all forms of FNAF media. It seems like he's very interested in exploring the idea of unevenly weighted justice and karmic punishment. Often these stories feel like a perversion of the inevitability of fate, which is a popular theme you see across tragedies or dramatic tales. The idea of morality tales, folklore, and folk lessons stretch far back, well beyond written record. To begin, I'll give a little primer on folk and morality tales. Folktales found their origin in oral storytelling, a tradition we can trace beyond written history. Folktales were important and distinct from other kinds of spoken stories, like myths or legends, because they often did not refer to real events or people, but rather told a story influenced by life, customs, traditions, and culture. While folktales would often begin as simple stories attempting to communicate some idea, because they traveled orally and not through written record, they would slowly become imbued with the feelings or thoughts or personal experiences of the storyteller. Therefore, every iteration of a story gained a new life and would always be changed and informed by the person telling it. The stories became deeply personal in an almost universal way, as they were the beautiful amalgamations of the lives of many, which were steeped in the culture and tradition of the community in which they were created. They could chart the generations of humans, all dealing with the same deeply and innately human problems. With every iteration of a story, and with the distance that it traveled, a moral would often be placed upon the story that would sometimes shift and change depending on region and storyteller. While the heart of it would remain the same, don't lie, be brave, idle hands are the devil's workshop, the story accompanying it could adapt to better suit its environment. One premise may not apply as well to one community as it does for another, and while the heart may remain, the exterior might change to better sell that truth. For example, and this is a lesson, not a moral, but it serves as a pretty easy explanation of this process. A story whose lesson may have originally been, don't stay outside late after dark because there are wolves, told in a community who had a problem with the nearby wolf population, may effectively sell the idea of danger and good decision-making. This premise might shift in a community with different values or local problems. Perhaps a community that is religious and had less wolves might change the wolves in the story to demons, maintaining the original point, which was to have some kind of control over children who may be too young to understand reasonable consequences or may not grasp the dangers of being out after dark. The thing they wanted to protect them from might have different implications, the preservation of physical safety versus, perhaps, a learned idea of preserving both physical and moral safety. The wolves, while truly present, were also a stand-in for a larger fear that can never quite be captured, one that often drives us as people to try and control the few things in our lives that we can. It's part instinct and part desire, and it makes up a majority of the morals you'll hear in old folktales and the reason they remain present in our modern world. There are many concise morals that reoccur throughout iterations of morality tales that follow this same idea. Ultimately, we are trying to impress upon a new generation the importance of caution and discernment because, at our core, we need to see these children survive. We have a biological drive that encourages us to protect them, and imparting wisdom is one way of doing that. Our ideas of values, morals, and proper behavior, as much as those may shift from group to group, and as much as we may agree or disagree with them, are rooted in the desire to see those we teach survive and thrive in a world they are unprepared to join. Children are born without a sense of guardedness, a limited survival instinct, and the capacity for total and complete trust in others. Often, our morals are our attempt at guiding and reforming those three key factors of survival. So, perhaps your community had a bigger issue with virtue and less so with wolves, and they subbed in demons or the devil and so on and so forth. Regardless, the heart of an oral folktale often remained the same. These stories and premises also tend to evolve with time and with customs, so as these stories moved physically throughout the world and across history, they gained new and updated versions of the same core morals based on the needs, wishes, traditions, and customs of the culture they came into contact with. Many modern stories find their roots in older stories, who find theirs in folktales. Think of all the movies that are secretly Shakespeare adaptations. For every one of those, there are 500 who could be traced back to a parent trying to keep their child out of the woods at night, a parent attempting to protect their child from being taken advantage of, a community elder trying to prevent a child from making the same mistakes they made. Sometimes those morals may be misguided, but they are all born out of a sense of necessity. Most stories like those are, again, rooted in the human instinct to seek control and safety. Think of those crazy early internet scary stories that your parents or older friends or skeptical family members told you. Ones about insane situations you know never happened. Maybe you were the recipient of any number of chainmail emails telling you a cautionary tale of a girl who was bullied or cyberbullied and then died in a well or something terrible, and now somehow haunts your shitty AOL inbox. It warns you to send that email to 15 other people or she'll show up at the foot of your bed and eat all your shoes. That was a moral about treating others with kindness being pushed through gullible kids to other gullible kids. Suddenly, bullying and cyberbullying had a body count that perhaps a child had never before considered. Maybe they would think about Carmen Winstead before talking shit in a chat room. Those tales are morality tales. Any story meant to scare you or present consequences that startle you into good behavior is, at its heart, a morality tale. In fact, nearly every book in the FNAF novel collections, aside from the Silver Eyes trilogy, is a morality tale of some kind. Often, the consequences are unevenly weighted against the severity of the trespass, but a majority of those are just tales to try and scare kids into good behavior, wrapped up in a Freddy Fazbear bow tie. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, don't bully, don't hit a kid with your car and not tell anyone, don't covet, don't be jealous, the list goes on. They are morality tales aimed at a younger audience who are already aware of FNAF, and so they can afford to have that commercial wrapping on them. The Candy Cadet stories, however, are a little different. They touch on control, of course, but they also focus very strongly on helplessness, hesitant desire, and unfair punishment. They are cautionary tales of inaction or the dangers of waiting too long or being selfish and unable to make a selfless choice. Or worse, the punishment for making a selfless choice. They are the dangers of becoming deeply attached to something, of allowing desire to outweigh the safety and lives of others. Sometimes they're just the undeserved punishment placed on someone who tried very, very hard to do the right thing. Much like the majority of FNAF's morality tales, the consequences are unevenly weighed considering the trespasses they are punishing. It's an exaggerated version of a morality tale meant to send a message steeped in horror and tragedy. We must also question who the arbiter of consequence is in this universe, as it informs these stories and their endings. The force at play throughout this entire franchise is consistently heavy-handed with discernment and punishment. It seems almost sinister. There isn't truly a clear pattern either. Sometimes, throughout the books, one who commits a grave sin can be redeemed, and others who commit the mildest of trespasses, or sometimes truly none at all, lose their lives. We need to keep this in mind as we look at these stories. Justice is unfairly doled out. When I talk about the morals of these stories, please remember that they are exaggerated and often punish what we might consider good instincts or righteous actions. We will begin with a story-by-story breakdown and list of possible morals, often pulling from Aesop's fables. I'll link below a fantastic resource on those. And then, at the end, we will look for connections to FNAF at large. Let's begin with the first story about a young woman and 5 keys. I will let Candy Cadet's audio play out in full, and then we will discuss.
Now I will tell you a story about a young woman who was sealed in a small room. In the room was a furnace, and 5 keys. She was told that each of the 5 keys would unlock one of 5 doors outside her room. Inside each room was a child that she could take with her as she fled the building. But she was only allowed to leave her own room with 1 key, not all 5. Desperate to find a way to save all 5 children, the woman melted the 5 keys together in the furnace to create a single key, hoping it would unlock all 5 doors. Of course, it did not work that way. Now her key opened none of the doors. Rather than leaving her room with a key to 1 life, she had taken with her the key to 5 deaths.
Firstly, if you're familiar with this story, you may have somehow come under the same impression that I did, that this building was on fire and the woman was saving these children from the fire. But I am just now realizing upon writing this script, so, a few days ago, that there is no fire. We don't actually know what the threat or danger is here. There is a furnace, which I guess with time and maybe with the ending of FNAF 6 made me falsely believe the story was about a fire. But that in itself is an example of the evolution of a folktale. Interestingly, we really have no idea at all what the threat is here. We only get the moral that her selfless desire to save them all was truly a selfish, unthinking action in an attempt to not have to live with the guilt of the children she left behind. Ambition is the bringer of loss or destruction. This is a story about the danger of guilt, in her desire to save all of these children and not have to leave any behind with this unknown threat and live with the knowledge that she only saved 1 and therefore picked 1. She instead acts illogically, overambitiously, out of desperation, and ends up losing her ability to save anyone. She wanted too desperately to save them all. She acted without logic and with a greater idea that outpaced reality, and it cost her the ability to save any of them. I am curious as to what this threat is. This woman is being held in this small room with a furnace against her will and intends to flee the building from this threat that is forcing her to stay and only save 1 child. However, she's given enough time to melt all 5 keys together, so the urgency of the situation is difficult to ascertain. Someone is keeping her here, and they don't seem to have any issue with her ruining her own chance to save a child. They somehow will enforce her ability to only save 1, but they don't seem to care about the children at all. She is the one being punished, and these kids are just collateral damage. Her door is either not locked, or she does not possess the key to it and it will be opened for her. She is only allowed to carry 1 key with her when she leaves, but whoever her captor is doesn't care that none of the 5 children will escape. They only care that she is being punished for her desire to save all 5. The story says, rather than leaving there with the key to 1 life, she had taken with her the key to 5 deaths, focusing entirely on her and not on the children. She is the audience surrogate, so to speak. We are meant to view her as ourselves and take the lessons she learned with us. We are meant to learn about the callousness of reality, I guess? The danger of guilt and selfish, unrealistic desire? Regardless, this woman is being punished before she is even put in danger. Her life doesn't seem at immediate risk here. She has the time to melt these keys and make this decision and choose a child to flee with. The constructor of this scenario has put her here to punish her for some aspect of her personality they are somehow already aware of. Typically, with folktales or morality stories, there is some kind of lead-up that makes it much easier for the audience to associate themselves with the audience surrogate character. Even in folktales that revolve solely around animals, they are given easily identifiable traits so that the audience can tell which one they are supposed to take the lesson from. The lead-up allows us to ingratiate ourselves with the story and the character's actions so that their punishment hits harder for us and is more likely to impress upon us a certain lesson. This story, and I know it's obviously starting en media res because of how short it has to be, Doesn't it all attempt to make the scene make any sense? But somehow, it doesn't matter. Her desperation is so overwhelming that I never realized I had misunderstood the premise because I was so heartbroken for the woman and her misguided attempt to do good. While it seems obvious to us that her melting the keys will steal any chance of saving any child from her, it's also easy to see why she made that choice. The virtuous or righteous among us might claim I never would have done that. It so obviously wouldn't work. But the point isn't logic or even solving this problem. The point is emotion. The frenzy, the fear, the clawing desperation, and total and complete panic that drove this woman to make a choice that seems totally illogical, but also completely understandable. Faced with the knowledge that she would have to choose one child and live forever knowing those other 4 kids would be at risk of a danger we never get to know, faced with the knowledge that she would be forever choosing a worthy child, one whose life somehow mattered more than the others, she acts overzealously, attempting to outsmart a consequence we don't even really understand. In her desperation, she attempts basically to be clever, to somehow win against the conditions she's placed in, to somehow do the impossible, and sadly, it takes from her the ability to do anything at all. It seems obvious she must love, or at the very least have some instinctual love for these children. We don't know how she knows them, or if she knows them at all, but her actions show, at the very least, the instinctual love and desire to protect children that exists within us as animals. She may have even considered, in the back of her mind, as I did, that if those other children survived, if the threat was not truly present, she could never undo the fact that she left them to die or to be at the mercy of this thing driving her to flee. She could never undo the impact of abandoning those other 4 children. If they survived, they would survive at the cost of knowing their lives mattered somehow less to her than that of the chosen 5th child, regardless of the truth of that statement. Her choice makes perfect, tragic, heartbreaking sense. This melted key shows to these children that she couldn't pick a favorite. She couldn't choose just one whose life mattered the most. This story is a warning about guilt, love, desperation, and the desire for control and safety. It is a warning that punishes those who cannot favor one life over 4 others. Some morals this may be calling on are: 1. A little common sense is often of more value than much cunning. Although it's hard to call desperation cunning, but regardless. 2. Attempt not impossibilities. This is a clear one. She is trying to do something that in no world would ever work. 3. By endeavoring to please everyone, one succeeds in pleasing nobody. This one is a little bit more lateral, but in attempting to save all, she saves none. 4. Impossible things we cannot hope to attain, and it is of no use to try. This one is a bit of a bummer, I'll admit, and pessimistic, though in this story, true. There is no hope for her to be the hero. She is simply a woman with 5 keys and an impossible choice to make. And 5. Zeal should not outrun discretion. This one again I think is less direct, but basically her desire for more, her passionate, see desperate, attempts at success ignore the discretion it takes to understand her choices are one child or none at all. Moving on, the second story again follows 5 things becoming one. This one airs more on the side of total inaction being the punishable trait or choice.
Now I will tell you a story about a little boy. He had a snake that he kept in a metal cage, whose hunger could not be satisfied. One day, the boy found 5 baby kittens outside his house. He brought them inside and kept them in a shoebox. He knew that the snake might kill them, but could not bring himself to get rid of the snake. He knew that if he chose one kitten to feed to the snake, it might be satisfied, but he could not choose. So, he went to bed, leaving the cage open. The snake went to the shoebox, chose a kitten at random, and ate it. After 5 nights had gone by, the boy was full of regret, and cut snake open. He pieced the remains together, and put the kitten back into the shoebox.
Both of these stories really focus on this idea that no amount of guilt can change the consequences of an action, which is a lesson that shows up across history in many stories. Shakespeare's Macbeth famously really leans into this idea that no amount of guilt over an action, no matter how correct you may have thought it was when you made it, can undo the thing that you have done. In Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, an accessory to the murder of King Duncan alongside her husband, says while sleepwalking in a fit of guilt and whilst attempting to wash already clean hands, "What, will these hands ne'er be clean? No more of that, my lord, no more of that. You mar all with this starting. Here's the smell of the blood still. All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. To bed, there's a knocking at the gate. Come, 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 give me your hand. What's done cannot be undone. To bed, to bed, to bed." Here, even in sleep, her truest emotion forces itself to be seen. When she cannot guard herself, cannot mask her true feelings, they shine through and others bear witness. She gives herself up and admits wrongdoing because her guilt is so strong it overwhelms her best attempts at secrecy. Her desire for absolution, to be rid of this guilt, cannot be tamed. This story of the cycling insanity and tragedy of a guilt-stricken consciousness haunts a large portion of historical storytelling. The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe is a very famous example of this idea. A man, so haunted by the gravity of a murder he committed, is driven to insanity by the guilt-created hallucination of the thumping of the heart of the man he murdered. This story is not a new one, and it has helped paint large swaths of our literary history's tragedies, and helped establish a lot of important themes for the later development of the Gothic style of literature and a particular kind of horror as a whole. These two stories, while succinct and quite short, use a small space to craft a much larger story rooted in a universal moral. Both are kind of incredible in their ability to communicate so much with so little. To break down this story in particular, we can begin with the facts that invent the premise. Firstly, the child has created the problem himself. He is not the victim of an elaborate saw trap like the woman in the last story. He has a pet snake whose hunger can never be tamed. It's almost an overly obvious symbol of temptation and greed. The snake, famously associated with the serpent in the Bible, has an insatiable greed that tempts this child to put the fate of other lives at risk. The inclusion of the color red for the snake helps strengthen this association, although with the inclusion of the detail of the metal cage, it seems like this story gets a lot more detail than the previous one because its plot is less immediately emotionally involved to the reader. The cage is metal. Metal is strong. We should trust this cage. The snake is red. Red is symbolic of danger. Snakes are symbolic of evil. We should not trust this snake. We are presented with the image of a child that is packaged with the visage of the complicit victim. For a really great video on the topic of the complicit victim in FNAF, you should check out a video by Threepio talking about Phone Guy. It's fantastic. I think his work is really great, and I've watched that one a few times over. It's a character trait Scott likes to use in his stories, and Threepio does a really amazing job of cracking that open and presenting so clearly a personality Scott really likes to employ in his stories. I'll have it linked below. He's got some other really great ones about other characters in the series that I highly recommend. This boy is certainly complicit at the very least. He finds 5 kittens and does a morally good deed by bringing them inside. He is potentially saving the lives of these innocent kittens from the harshness of nature. However, in this attempt to do a good act, he is simultaneously aware of the danger he is putting them in, and he makes no attempts to rescue them from this new danger. The influence and temptation of the snake's hunger is simply too strong for the boy to assume he can possibly overrule. In fact, he makes no attempt to even consider that the snake's future action of eating a kitten is avoidable. He knows that giving up one may be enough to satiate the snake entirely, but he cannot imagine being an active participant in the death of a kitten, despite the fact that regardless he will become one. To him, this is fate. This is set in stone, and no action of his can stop it. And so, instead of taking action to mitigate the harm, or make himself an implicit actor, he becomes complicit. In not choosing, he has made his choice. His action is inaction. Because he could not choose to harm one kitten, all 5 die. He leaves the cage unlocked. This is his choice. He is allowing them all to die, and he knows this. He knows that one by one they will all be eaten. At no point does he relocate the shoebox or lock the cage. He has made his choice to allow all 5 kittens to die because in his mind, he couldn't choose just one. He is totally unable to see that he didn't have to let any of them die. He has never considered simply locking the gate of the snake's cage. And then, harrowed by guilt and regret at his inaction, he is again responsible for the death of another living being. He cuts open the snake, despite knowing it will not save the kittens. The snake is his guilt made flesh. He is killing because of the weight of the guilt of killing. Because he chose to save none, he now kills another animal for its actions he facilitated. And then, faced with all 5 kittens who are dead, there was no saving them, he stitches all 5 kittens together, or rather, the pieces of all 5. Seemingly, these pieces make up one kitten, the one he could not sacrifice, the one kitten that could have taken the place of all 5. He is presented with the many kittens and pieces that amount to the whole of one kitten whose death could have prevented that of the other 4, and beyond that, a sacrifice he determined was the only other option to his inaction. And then, as a cruel twist of fate, he kills the snake whom he could not previously fathom denying its greed. He could have, at any time, removed the snake from the equation. He could have moved the kittens out of the room. But instead, he is left with one dead snake and one amalgamated kitten in a shoebox. His guilt in one hand, his consequences in the other. He places the kitten back inside of the shoebox, its resting place the very home of his inaction. Some morals this may be calling on are: 1. It is too late to whet the sword when the trumpet sounds to draw it. Meaning it's too late to prepare once the act has already begun. His regret comes far too late. He is willing now to control the snake's greed, but because he waited, death is the option he chooses when, if he had prepared or simply had the guts to have foresight, he could have been ready for the danger the hunger of the snake would present to the kittens. 2. Don't be surprised by the consequences of your own actions. This one is self-explanatory. It is the predecessor to FAFO, fuck around and find out. Do not be surprised when your misdeeds result in unfavorable consequences. 3. The desire for imaginary benefits often involves the loss of present blessings. The boy desired to satiate the hunger of the snake and be free of the guilt of sacrificing a kitten at the cost of losing all 5 kittens and ending the snake's hunger regardless. And 4. The misfortunes arising from a man's own misconduct are the hardest to bear. The pain of your own actions is the hardest to handle. In regret and grief and guilt at his own misdoing, he kills his former companion. The third story is, in my opinion, the most tragic.
Now I will tell you a story about a kind man who would visit 5 orphans and bring them toys and gladness. The man lived alone, and lived in fear that someone might break into the house of one of the 5 children, so he adopted all 5, and brought them together in one place, in his own home. He promised them to never leave them, and they promised to always come home, and never stay out too late. He left one day to buy food, his heart being filled with gladness, but returned to find that the burglar had chosen his home, and killed all 5 of the children. The man could only afford one coffin, so he stitched the 5 bodies together to make one, and buried the child. That night, there was a knock at the door.
This story is so sad. This man, stricken with fear and overcome with the desire to bring safety and joy to the lives of these children, inadvertently places all of them in harm's way at the same time. It's like a perversion of the previous story. He didn't have to pick a sacrifice, but hypothetically, they were all safer in different homes. But does that safety outweigh isolation? Can it console fear? Clearly not. In his attempt to do good and protect and cherish and care for these vulnerable children, he is accidentally putting them all in great danger. Now, a single break-in would affect all 5 children, not just one. It is a trade-off that perhaps he is unaware he's making. By all accounts, he is doing a good thing and being unfairly punished for it by the wicked, genie loophole-ass being that doles out justice in this universe. In wishing to protect them all, he doesn't realize he is putting them all in harm's way simultaneously. In his effort to increase their protection 5-fold, he is also increasing their danger by just as much. The stitching of the 5 bodies into one casket is such a horrifying and crushing scene to imagine. He's not only bringing all 5 children together yet again, as he did in his attempt to keep them safe and bring them endless joy, but he is also showing the consequence of bringing all 5 together. As one group, they all perished. Had they not been together, perhaps they all would have survived. And yet, before him now lies the stitched-together mass of what was once a dream for the future and a desperate attempt to quell his own fears about their safety. Even despite the fact that he could only afford one coffin, he still gives the children everything he can and treats them all equally. They all get to lie in this coffin, no matter what it takes to get them inside of it. It's tragic because it feels very honest. There is no shying away from his decision and the possible grotesqueness of it. He will stitch them up so that they can fit, and so that, even in death, he can care for them and protect them under the shield of the wooden coffin equally. The final line brings to mind the story of the monkey's paw. The monkey's paw is one of the most well-known and classic examples of the cautionary aphorism, "Be careful what you wish for, you may just get it." This aphorism has popped up throughout history as an expression in many languages and cultures, but the modernized example originates in Aesop's fables. The original saying there is, "Be careful what you wish for, lest it come true." The monkey's paw takes this aphorism and dials it up to 11. The Monkey's Paw was published in 1902 and written by W. Jacobs. It's a short story. I'll have a link to it below if you'd like to read it. I highly suggest it. Two parents and their son come into the possession of a monkey's paw through a friend of theirs who had acquired it while traveling overseas. He tells the family that the paw was cursed with a kind of magic and explains the motives of the man who cursed it. He wanted to show that fate ruled people's lives and that those who interfered with it did so to their sorrow. This isn't even foreshadowing. It's the message hitting you in the face so that you realize the characters in the story have just as much of a warning as we do. The question isn't, did they know? The question will be, wouldn't you do it too? The man tells them that the paw is cursed so that 3 people can each make 3 wishes with it. When asked how he came to acquire it, he said that the man before him made his 3rd and final wish, to die, and that is how he came into possession of this paw. Well, if you hoped these folks would heed his warning, you would be mistaken. Where would be the fun in that? As the pair make wishes, the monkey's paw twists like a snake. The father wishes for 200 pounds at his son's behest. At first, nothing happens, and so they deem it nonsense. Their son leaves for work the next morning and tragically dies in a grotesque workplace accident. A man from the company comes to their home to present them with a check for 200 pounds, compensation for his death. The parents realize to their great horror that the paw truly did grant their wish, but desired to chalk it up to coincidence. They bury their son shortly thereafter, and quickly the grief drives his mother to the brink of madness. She decides in the middle of the night they must wish for him to come back to life. The boy's father protests in horror, saying if his body was too disturbing to behold when he died, what makes her think 10 days passing wouldn't make it all the more horrifying? She cries out, "Do you think I fear the child I have nursed?" Despite her husband's protests, he wishes for his son to be alive again, and the two wait in what seems to be an endless silence. Finally, deciding it truly was a coincidence, they go back to bed. Suddenly, a knock at the door, followed by 2 more. The mother rushes to go downstairs and receive her son, and the father follows in horror, attempting to stop her. As her efforts are thwarted by her inability to reach the deadbolt on the door, her husband searches desperately in the dark for the paw, as he knows he has 1 wish left. The moment the wife successfully unlatches the bolt, the father makes his final wish, one we do not actually get to hear. No one is behind the door. Another finger on the monkey's paw curls. That saying doesn't actually originate with the short story, by the way. I'll have it linked below. I highly recommend reading it for yourself. Even knowing what happens, it's a worthwhile read if you've never experienced it before. The tension is masterful, and the dread and horror, even when you know the ending, are palpable. The final line of Candy Cadet's story, "That night there was a knock at the door," makes me think of The Knocking of the Dead and of Pet Sematary, a famous retelling of the core of the story of the monkey's paw. Be careful what you wish for, because it might just come back. The old man stitches the 5 children together because he can only afford 1 coffin, and then he buries the child. The story itself refers to these 5 children stitched together as 1 child, much like the kitten at the end of the previous story. 5 things have become 1, and then there is a knock at the door, and the story ends. Perhaps the knock is coming from the child, perhaps another burglar, perhaps the original burglar. It could be anyone. The fact that the ending is left so ambiguous allows the story to lean in 2 directions at once. There is a sense of hopefulness, like the mother in the monkey's paw felt imagining her child on the other side of the door. And then there is a feeling of dread and fear of the unknown. We never get to know what lies beyond the door, and we'll never know if the old man does either. These are some morals I felt might fit this story, despite it being overly cruel and unjust to the old man. I tried to imagine what the powers that be might have felt the moral was in this universe. 1. Pay too much attention to danger, we may fall victims to it. If we focus too strongly on danger, we may make ourselves all the more vulnerable to it. 2. Much wants more and loses all. This is a sad one and almost feels unfair to the old man, but not untrue given the premise of the story. 3. To enjoy our blessings, we must have freedom. This leans more into his fear of the dangers of the unknown and intrusion of the home, which acts as a border that ironically is where all of the danger really lives. 4. We should not permit our ambition to lead us beyond the limits of our power. Essentially, his desire or attempt to keep all of them safe is an attempt at something beyond his control. He can only control his choices, not those of others. He cannot control the actions of a burglar. Some things are outside of his control. 5. We should not think wholly of ourselves, and we should remember that life is uncertain. This one is a bit of a tough sell, admittedly. It's hard to paint this man's actions as selfish. He was acting out of a desire for control. He wanted to try and control the environment and conditions in which these children lived so that they might be safer than they were before. But he was doing that because caring for these children brought him gladness and satisfaction, and moving them into his home quelled his fears, not necessarily theirs. Life is uncertain. Try as he might to control the variables, some are simply beyond our reach. As we move into story number 4, we have officially left FFPS and are entering the Steel Wool era of games with an entry from Ruin.
Now I will tell you a story about a mother and her little boy who lived alone in a cabin in the dark woods. There was a monster in the woods, but the mother caught it and kept it locked in the basement. The monster always made scary noises at night, but the mother would tell the boy not to worry because it could never get out. Then she would sing the boy a lullaby to sleep. One day, the monster stopped crying and instead listened and learned the lullaby. The next day, mother went out to find food. The monster sang the lullaby from the basement. The little boy heard the lullaby and opened the door.
This story feels fairly straightforward, and yet I truly have so many questions. Firstly, why does this mother live in a scary cabin in the woods with her son? Sure, with the rising cost of living, I could see off-grid homes becoming more intriguing, but this one also has a monster nearby, and a basement. Do many cabins in the woods have basements? I'm also curious why the mother caught the monster. We're probably supposed to assume that the monster was dangerous and the mother did this to protect her child. However, we get no direct indication that the monster is evil or looks to do either of them grievous or bodily harm, though that is implied and likely something we as the audience are already primed to believe so that the writer of the story can use the short space as effectively as possible. I am just so curious though. How did the mother catch the monster? Why lock it in the basement and not kill it? Why invite further danger into your home? Quite literally. Okay, I'll stop being difficult. What is this story telling us? On the mother's behalf, it is a lesson in overconfidence and allowing your ego to eclipse your better judgment. The mother is completely confident in the safety and security of the basement door, and so she has not considered that it would ever be opened from the other side. Her confidence that the monster is well sealed and that her son is no longer afraid has allowed her to let her guard down, so much so that she doesn't even notice when the growling stops. Perhaps she took it as a sign that the monster had finally submitted to her will, or perhaps in her belief in the sureness of her work, she had simply stopped hearing the monster. On the child's behalf, it is a warning about trust, naivety, and common sense. Interestingly, the lullaby, instead of lulling the child to sleep so that the monster could perhaps sneak out, draws the child to open the basement door. Did he think his mother was down there? The setup would lead us to believe that he might fall asleep from hearing it and thus the house would be unguarded, but instead, this child hears his nightly lullaby from the basement and elects to go check it out. Maybe he had forgotten about the growling too. This story in particular always leaves me wanting more. I so desperately want to see what's on the other side of the door from the child's perspective, and I want to know the real threat of the monster. Would the monster even harm the child? Perhaps the monster would rather convince the child to help conspire against the boy's mother. What risk does the monster pose? Is it violent? The growls would like us to think so, but clearly not so violent that the mother couldn't somehow trap it in the basement. She's also masterfully downplaying its risk to her child, which probably doesn't help her case when he finally opens the door. This is meant to act as a primer for the ending of Ruin, but we won't talk about that just yet, although I do think the idea of mimicry in general is worth touching on. So when I say mimicking, just know that it's a lowercase m, folks. The idea of mimicry is stuff of folklore legend. Monsters, cryptids, and creatures of local superstition have long relied on the intrinsic, biological horror of hearing someone or something that isn't actually there. Some of my all-time favorite horror stories rely on the idea of vocal mimicry because I personally find it unbelievably terrifying. If you're from the US and in particular grew up anywhere near the Appalachians, you probably have heard warnings of not responding to any voices you hear outside after dark, no matter who they claim to be, or some variation of that same idea. This fear is present seemingly across much of the US and globally, although I can't speak to those stories personally. The Skinwalker became very popular and present in modern pop culture, despite having existed in concept and legend for hundreds of years, quite recently. It's the same fear that drove robotics professor Masahiro Mori to coin the term Uncanny Valley in 1970, following a hypothesis that the more lifelike something becomes, the more uncomfortable a human's instinctual reaction to seeing it will be. There are lots of fears we are, technically, prepared to handle. Our bodies will fight against us violently to get air if we stay too long underwater. The adrenaline rush phenomenon famously gives mothers the strength to lift cars to save their children. We have a gut feeling born of the incredible perception our bodies manage without us even being aware of. But there's something about being faced with our own visage, though somehow an illegitimate copy, that cuts to the core of us. For me, that's what makes mimicry horror so effective and why I find it lands consistently. I like the bringing in of this new form of instinctive horror to these stories and FNAF as a whole. No longer are we playing only on the biological instinct to protect children, we are now trying to protect them from a form of ourselves we cannot understand. Alright, let's chat morals. Here are some I've felt applied fairly well to this story. 1. Keep your promises. While not a direct moral, because we never see the child promise not to open the door, nor do we ever see the mother consider telling her child this, it felt like a pretty classic moral for cautionary tales, and so I felt like, because it could be stretched just enough to fit the premise, I may as well include it. 2. Do not trust blindly. Again, less direct. I think this one felt applicable to me because the boy never considers that the source of the lullaby might not be his mother, or if he does, he has become so conditioned to enjoy the lullaby that he seems to trust the force singing it. 3. Danger sometimes comes from a source that is least suspected. This one leans more on the idea that the mother's confidence in the security of the basement means she has neglected to consider the danger her own child poses. The biggest threat to their safety was, perhaps not the monster itself, but its effect on her child and then her son's decisions as a result of both her words and the monster's tricks. 4. There is always some vulnerable part in the strongest armor. The vulnerability here being both her own son and his possible gullibility, and her own ability to ignore the monster so effectively that she does not notice it stopped growling. And then 5, we'll do a little lightning round of 2 classic morals that are kind of just the same soup with a different spoon. Zeal should not outrun discretion, and false confidence often leads into danger. Now let's talk about our 5th story, which is the first of the 2 Help Wanted 2 stories.
Now let me tell you a story about a young woman who, when she was little, was led into a dark forest by a witch and almost eaten. She had fallen for the friendly voice without discernment and was led astray. She had escaped before being thrown into the oven, but would have a scar for the rest of her life. When she had grown, she sought revenge on the witch, and entered the forest again willingly, this time with the confidence of age and experience. She was greeted at the mouth of the forest by a young boy who offered to help guide her through the darkness. She welcomed the help, and followed the young boy over the river, through the jagged trees, and toward a small house. "Come," the boy said. "Press here before killing the witch." The young woman was tired, and would kill the witch in the morning. She followed the boy into the house. The oven door closed. The witch would finally have her meal.
This story interestingly leans on some very classic folktale tropes to create its premise, something which, aside from the last story taking place in the woods, we haven't really seen all that much yet in these stories. I love the ending of this story. It's so fantastically upsetting and cleverly worded. We get the absolute bare minimum needed to communicate this idea, and it's so fantastic. Sometimes less is truly more. This is such a wonderful example of taking advantage of your storytelling medium, which is a topic I'd really like to get into entirely in another video. But here, I think it's such a great moment to appreciate. She followed the boy into the house. The oven door closed. The witch would finally have her meal. This is a scene that doesn't play in any other form of media. It's almost like a dream. There's no way we could be provided with direct visuals that wouldn't somehow ruin this moment. There is so much unexplained, so much left to be vague, that we get to experience the end of the story as the young woman in the story. Just as soon as she learns she's been trapped in the oven, we do too. It's a really fantastic and cleverly done moment of splitting the view. Sometimes as readers, depending on how a story is written, we have the benefit of picking up on foreshadowing, or even better, an author will employ dramatic irony in order to make an ending that much more tense for the reader. However, here, while we may have had our doubts about the legitimacy of this boy guiding her through the woods, and the fact that she is immediately repeating her old mistakes by falling for a friendly voice and lacking any discernment or introspection about what got her into this mess in the first place, basically, you may have guessed the ending. We don't actually know what exactly the twist is until she does. We have no reason to believe this small house is somehow an oven, that somehow she can follow behind the boy and still be the one ensnared. I'm just a big fan if that wasn't obvious. I really enjoy the addition of the scar in this story. It's unclear which part of her escape scarred her, where the injury is, what exactly caused it, etc. However, as a literary device, a physical scar is a very nice vessel for the idea of the permanent damage a traumatic event can cause. It's an easy way for an author to employ that idea without having to make it the primary focus of the rest of the work, especially with the limited word count of these stories. Alongside that, we are delivered a lot about this young woman's character through very little. We can tell she is not a good judge of character, others and her own included. She is easily deceived as a child, she is foolhardy as an adult, and ultimately is once again easily deceived. However, this time it truly is her fault. She re-entered the woods willingly, not realizing that her issue with discernment had never been solved. She is more confident, yes, but that means nothing if she cannot learn from her mistakes. She is immediately duped in the exact same fashion as she had been before. A friendly voice was all it took then, and a friendly voice was all it took now. I think it's interesting that she is led by a child, and I think it plays well into her feelings of confidence gained by adulthood. She likely would not accept help from another adult because her revenge is also an attempt to prove herself and how she has grown. A child, however, doesn't challenge her self-perception, and because she never understood the root of her issue, she sees no threat, nor clearly any issue with a child being in the woods, knowing where the witch is, and wanting to help her find the witch to kill her. To her, this doesn't register as strange because her view is short-sighted. The threat to her is an old witch, not her inability to be discerning. So a child couldn't possibly raise any red flags because a child isn't an old witch. Duh. She believes her issue is entirely external, much like the scar. A superficial wound, you could say. She has a physical, visual reminder. To consider this choice as a writer, this would be a great way to show that the character is, for lack of a better word, shallow. Her wounds are only skin deep, and so a physical scar can be used by an author to show how a character internalizes their pain or struggles. Her wounds are only skin deep because that is how she views them. Her struggles are entirely external. The scar is solely physical. The witch is the problem, not her naivety as a child and not her naivety as an adult either. As a child, she can't be blamed for being taken advantage of. But, as an adult, she creates the scenario for herself which will be her downfall. She never realized that believing the friendly voice was what coaxed her over the forest's edge. Much like now, as an adult, she doesn't find it strange that a mysterious little boy, happily willing to help her, a friendly voice, is once again guiding her through the woods. It's sad because initially this clearly was not her fault, her being taken advantage of as a child by this witch in disguise. She did nothing to deserve that, and it's sad that she was a victim of this treacherous evil. However, what I think this story and the Fazbear internal sense of justice wants us to focus on is her active choice to re-enter the situation as an adult without having made any changes to herself that would ensure the ending this time was any different. It's a cautionary tale of two kinds: know thyself and know that you can never truly know others. Here are some of many morals I could have pulled for this story, but I felt like these hit on every aspect of the story pretty well. 1. Looks can be deceiving. Do not trust blindly. An obvious one. Her trusting nature is a naivety which these creatures are preying on. 2. Avoid a remedy that is worse than the disease. For this, I think her re-entering the woods to try and exact revenge on the witch without realizing her own weaknesses is a remedy which is worse than the disease of the memory of this traumatic event. 3. Danger sometimes comes from a source that is least suspected. It's making a comeback. The child guiding her here is almost completely opposite to the image most folks have in mind of a folklore or fairy tale witch. This would be a source that is perhaps least suspected by her. 4. False confidence often leads into danger. I think her confidence is false because it's misplaced, though you could disagree with this one. 5. He who seeks to injure others often injures only himself. A classic that fits very well here. And 6. There are no friends whom you know not whether to trust or distrust. Basically, always be wary. You can never know what is in someone else's mind, and you can never know their truest intentions. I believe story number 6 should stand alone for a possibly unpopular opinion. Not because it's an ad, but because I believe we are witnessing story 6 through the eyes of the aggressor.
Now I will tell you a story about a family that missed the most important opportunity in their lives. It was a limited time offer that included a family-style pizza with all their favorite toppings. It also came with a side of fries, mozzarella sticks, extra large soft drinks, and a toy surprise. It was only $49.99 while supplies lasted. They did not purchase the food and they all died.
For this story, I'd like to do a little exercise. Let's read it again, imagining we are the ones giving the family this offer, and we are the ones who determine that their rejection is a failure that should cost them their lives.
Now I will tell you a story about a family that missed the most important opportunity in their lives. It was a limited time offer that included a family-style pizza with all their favorite toppings. It also came with a side of fries, mozzarella sticks, extra large soft drinks, and a toy surprise. It was only $49.99 while supplies lasted. They did not purchase the food and they all died.
The words used start to take on a new meaning. Where before the descriptions read as advertising fodder, with this new perspective they begin to read as someone who is expressing how amazing these things are, how generous they are to extend an offer like this, how valuable this deal is, and how amazing these items must be, and, by extension, how deeply ungrateful this family must be to turn down something so amazing that was offered out of kindness. When taking on the mindset of someone who is wicked enough to believe death is a fair punishment for rejecting a meal deal, the innocuous word choices begin to explain the meaning of the story according to its storyteller. The internal justifications for a person whose morals align with the insane events of this tale are laid out clearly if you're willing to try and peek into their head. This is, I believe, being told from the perspective of the one who is doling out justice. How ungrateful that family must be. They passed up the most important opportunity in their lives. Such a steal that we offered for a limited time, too. Not like that was doing us any good. Why would they decline? Is this a personal failing of ours? Was our deal not good enough for them? Is anything good enough for them? And who do they think they are? So much better than us. So much better than a great deal, an incredible bargain, an offer made out of goodwill. Suddenly, the punishment begins to align with the mindset of the one who is telling the story. To them, the ending makes total sense. It has no fanfare because it's a logical, though also deeply reactive and emotional, ending to them. This kind of reactive behavior could be born out of insecurity, a need to prove oneself. It reads as a kind of William Afton-like characterization. Maybe only because he is the most callous killer we have in FNAF. And also, as an audience, it feels good to imagine the bad guy as insecure. We want to be rooting against him, and planting seeds like that help keep the audience incentivized to see what happens to him next. It really could be anyone, or no one specific, but it feels right to imagine this might have been William's MO at some point. After all, what kind of character, other than a coward, has to hide behind a mascot costume to commit an atrocity he seemingly believes is just? His killing of Charlie was opportunistic. It wasn't brave or strong or imposing of him to take advantage of the vulnerability of a child trapped outside of a pizzeria in the rain. The use of a disguise alone, luring children and lulling them into a false sense of security, exposes a deep-seated insecurity. Afton knows he is not to be trusted around children, and he knows they would not trust him. Children, those who are the least guarded of us all, would not follow this man. Even if he worked at their favorite pizzeria, even if he had candy or toys, he had to completely obscure his identity in order to commit his crimes, because he knew that no child would follow him if he were just himself. He can make an excuse and say that it was so nobody could identify him, but truthfully, the suit probably made him feel powerful, something he had to seek out externally. The movie version of Afton shows this off nicely. He is incomplete on his own, and he knows this. That insecurity could align with the characterization we can extrapolate from this Candy Cadet story. This story can, of course, also be interpreted as a form of advertising for Fazbear, especially given the very meta-narrative of the Help Wanted games. What a great deal on some amazing products that Fazbear sells. That family was so foolish. See what happens when you pass up a bargain? Who would ever say no to a Fazbear pizza with all their favorite toppings? Certainly not you, since you know now the punishment is death. Haha, just kidding. Probably. I'm not going to cover any verbatim morals for this one because I feel like the analysis and reinterpretation is more important. So, beyond that very literal connection through our final Candy Cadet story, what larger connections can we make? The recurring symbol across the FNAF games of 5 things becoming 1 showing up here is not surprising. Scott likes to remind us of that one a lot. 5 things become 1, born out of pain, desperation, an attempt at safety, at salvation. Trying to save anyone in this series is like holding water in your hands. The tighter you grasp it, the quicker it's gone. The figure of the security puppet comes to mind. Literally, a tool built for control in order to protect Henry's child, turned into a tool for control utilized by Henry's child. The security puppet is trying to help the souls of the children from the MCI, though in doing so is bringing upon them a new kind of pain. Awareness, but still no control. We get a literal representation of the pain that births these amalgams at the end of Sister Location with Ennard. The amalgamation of Circus Baby, Ballora, Funtime Foxy, Funtime Freddy, and Bon Bon. 5 if you're keeping count. After the ejection of Circus Baby, who here could serve as our version of the one child that could have been saved, the one kitten that could have been sacrificed, etc. It becomes Molten Freddy, still animated by pain and still an amalgamation of many acting as one. It also brings to mind the idea present in the advertising of FNAF 4, 4 games, 1 story. There has always been a theme of separation and combination across FNAF media from the very start. I mean, think of, you are broken, I will put you back together. In FNAF 1, we have 4 animatronics acting violently towards us as we slowly begin to understand their motives, and then, finally, a 5th. One that cannot be found on purpose, and yet one that must be known. It says it's me, implying recognition. If somehow you know this one that cannot be found and must find you, you immediately, by extension, know the other 4. What about our other 2 stories about trust and illusion? What do those tell us? Well, to tie back to something we just covered, trust and illusion are exactly the terms I would use to describe Afton's actions in donning a costume to lure a child. That is trust built out of an illusion. It began in the first game and has never stopped showing up. In FNAF 2, the new toy animatronics are equipped with a facial recognition system, the illusion of safety. We should be able to trust these animatronics. They are machines that can work faster than a human can. They can recognize things we might be blind to. We trust that they will keep our children safe. But then, as we learn in one of the later nights, someone has seemingly tampered with their facial recognition systems. If we'd gotten any more lax with our safety protocols, thinking these would protect us, we would quickly be realizing how foolish we were. FNAF 4 is the most literal version of this idea. We do not know how much of what we are seeing is real, and how much is an illusion. We are playing as a child, so even in fiction, we don't know how much is real or how much is a child's mind trying to make sense of things it doesn't understand. What's seen in shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child. Even we cannot tell how much of this game is literal, an illusion, or the misinterpretation of both. The further away from this game we get, the more obscured it becomes. How much of this is true? If we go into these games in good faith, trusting that 4 games really do equal one story, trusting that this game will give us answers, and we are met with illusions, is that maybe what we asked for? Is the truth meant to be illusory? What if Crying Child really is seeing these monsters because of fucking nightmare gas or whatever the answer then would be literally that the truth is illusion. Maybe we are naive to think the truth would be so literal. Nowadays, in the modern games canon, we obviously have the story of the Mimic. The Cadet story about the monster in the basement is one you can find in the lead up to the ending of Ruin. Practically, it acts as a great primer for anyone playing the game who isn't aware of the books. If you'd never heard of the Mimic, you'd be right to ask, who the fuck is this guy? Cadet is priming you and using your gaming instincts to collect all the coins and get the special message to force upon you preparation. Here is a warning. Heed it or don't, but don't say I didn't tell you what was in the basement. If you hadn't realized the twist by then, holding your hand is a courtesy Cadet could offer. The second, about the woman in the woods, could also be about the Mimic and the events of Ruin. We can't say for sure how much Cassie lines up with this female protagonist. We know she went to the Pizzaplex in the past at some point, given that she is familiar with Roxy, but otherwise, the first half is inconclusive. The second is fairly literal. A young boy's voice leads her into a false sense of security. Although, really, Cassie thinks she's the one helping Gregory, only to learn she has been tricked into falling right into the witch's trap. It seems to maybe line up better with other characters, though not necessarily as a whole as of yet. We see M1, aka Fiona, in Secret of the Mimic, literally showing herself as a witch in the woods in Moon.exe. It's implied that she cooks and eats the baby owl we bring her, and in return, she grants us a mask of his face in order to get by the moon, a character who seems distraught by this event. Regardless, some small creature is being lured into this witch's home to be eaten. We are sort of the young boy in this story, the facilitator, the go-between, the weapon. Some people believe that Moon.exe is showing the process that M2 underwent to become David, which could align with this story in a way. It's unclear what the witch's previous non-lethal harm against David would have been. If she ever hurt him before, it's not something we know about. If we play as M2, we would somehow be convincing David to die at the hand of M1 for our own gain, but M2 seemingly didn't exist while David was still alive. It seems like we only had M1, just Fiona. M2 seems to have been the replacement for David that Murray was perhaps coaxed into creating. So not a great one-to-one there either, but please remember that I'm not a purist and I really don't care to learn about how Moon.exe maps onto the story perfectly. Regardless though, this story hits on so many familiar themes that tie back into FNAF. Revenge is present in nearly every game. Henry seeks revenge as a comfort for his own guilt in FFPS. Michael seeks revenge as a comfort for his own guilt in FNAF 3, assuming he's the one who burned it down, as sister location might lead us to believe. The vengeful spirit seeks revenge and harms everyone else in the process. The Mimic seeks unseeing revenge on just about anything that walks. The core 4 seek revenge without a clear sense of awareness. They want to hurt just about any adult. The toy animatronics seek revenge after being tampered with. We can kind of ascertain by now that William may have come back after having been a night guard at that location, and some action of his set them off. Perhaps he tampered with their system so they wouldn't recognize him. Remember, when FNAF 2 was made, just months after FNAF 1, it's likely the posters in FNAF 1 stating the suspect had been identified and captured were still true. This guy probably knew he was on a database and knew that that's what these robots were looking for. They could do that job better than a human could, considering he somehow got hired. Their anger at his return seems to have caused the bite of 87. Popular theory has determined that Jeremy Fitzgerald is not a pseudonym for Michael Afton this time, and that our final birthday party we work before the place shuts down is where we get bitten by an animatronic that has become hostile towards adults but still safe around children. Again, I don't want to know the theories that prove and clear all of this up. Poorly placed trust comes up across the entire franchise. We touched on this already. And finally, we get this sort of grand moral. An eye for an eye, what you give is what you will receive. He who seeks to injure others often injures only himself. Makes me think of UCN, of the vengeful spirit. Did the actions of the one you should not have killed keep Afton around a little too long? Long enough for him to be rescued? Was the pain inflicted upon him worth the pain inflicted upon everyone else who couldn't move on? In a way, perhaps we are all the young woman. Our attempts to solve the story before have wounded us, left us with scars. We come back in, ready to solve it all, to win the fight. Something appears, a promise of help, a promise that this time will really do it, only to realize this help was really leading us back into the depths of FNAF and its endlessly murky waters. The oven door is closing behind us. The Candy Cadet stories are truly so incredible to me. They're fantastically well-packaged horror tales with classic, almost archetypical morals, and punishments that far exceed that which would be reasonable. It is forcing us to view the skewed sense of omnipotent justice at play in this universe. The greater force in this world does not weigh all sins the same, and it often rewards bad behavior and punishes good behavior. They are a wonderful, concise vessel for us to learn so much about how the force of this universe works and what its morals are, in the games in particular. I am obsessed with these stories, and I hope you enjoyed joining me on this very long journey through each of them. I wanted to thank everyone who left such kind comments on my last video. I wasn't expecting anyone to watch it, let alone for so many people to be so lovely and welcoming to me. It's certainly far beyond anything I could have expected, and I thank you all for your kindness. I also want to thank all of the people who shared valuable and interesting insights with me on my last video and places they disagreed with the terms or analytical approaches therein. It's such a gift and a joy to get to experience the analysis of others, and the beauty is that none of us will ever interpret a piece of media identically. What a boring world that would be. You were all so kind and respectful, and I'm so happy and grateful to sort of inadvertently created a space where I get to see how others with a literary interest in FNAF approach the material. Thank you all so much for your kind, thoughtful, and respectful input. The fact that you shared a different opinion or view with me in such good faith was truly a gift. I'd like to restate here that I'm not a theorist, and sharing my own opinion or thoughts on the solution to the games isn't really something I'm particularly interested in. I don't really have many good conclusions. At some point, I found solving FNAF to be far less fun than simply poking at FNAF and trying to open it up and see how it works. My videos probably won't have any kind of grand conclusion or explanation at the end of them, and I hope you can enjoy them all the same. My primary focus will be on overlapping literary concepts with FNAF as a whole, and I hope you don't find that disappointing. I'm also not super interested in hearing about what the most updated theories of the community are in relation to these analytical videos. I love to watch other people's videos for that, so, don't feel the need to get in the comments and really try your best to explain them, because I probably just won't get them. Okay, that's my rambling done. Thanks so much to all the folks that have been so cool and kind to me. A special thanks to Solid Silver and Gibby's Horror Homestead for welcoming me into the community with such open arms. Getting to hop on a live stream with them was very, very cool. And thank you to all of you who watched that video and left such encouraging comments. I never expected to be making a second YouTube video, much as I really never expected to make the first, so thanks for being so patient with me and understanding of the learning curve I'm working through. I promise I'm doing my best to make these videos look and sound alright, and I hope you can enjoy them despite their amateurish nature. As always, all resources and cited works will be in the description. Alright, thanks guys. Bye!